I'm Zoe and today I'm going to be colouring Esmeralda. I'm going to begin by colouring her skin and then I'm going to share some tips and techniques for colouring the folds in her clothing. And then we'll move on to the hair as well as adding a special magical touch to the very end in the background. So I hope you enjoy the video and let's get started. When I first start colouring the face, I tend to use what will be my main skin colour, and I just start to form the main shapes. Over the time I have, found sort of a way that works for me, and I tend to start from the edges and work towards the centre of the image. And I do that for most images. It's just sort of the way that that it's sort of become my style over time. And so yes, I'm just starting to form the shapes, and it's really, I'm placing the colour where I'm going to start building up the depth with darker shades. So now I'm coming in with a slightly darker shade, and I'm essentially going to be going over what I've just already coloured. Lightly flicking it over the top, and so that I can work towards building my shape of the face, giving her the roundness, pushing some areas back, allowing others to come forward, which will be lighter. And I find that if I just do it little bit by little bit like this, then any mistakes that I make, I can try and fix along the way. So I'm coming in with my darkest shade now. And typically I would be turning my page around, and so I'm not 100% happy with what I did there, because I'd prefer to, if you see on the left hand side here, how I can sort of flick it into the center area, whereas I started from the center on the other side. So I've got a bit of a blob there that I need to fix. I tend to like to flick towards the center so that I get the flick sort of finish, you want to think of it that way. So now I'm coming back with my main shade, which is going to start to soften and blend all these colours out. Yeah, but don't be, because I'm trying to keep it steady here so that you don't get sick from me turning the image. Yeah, I wasn't in the best position, so don't be afraid to turn your paper around so that you get the best angle for using your markers. Yes, you can see there that I'm just slowly going over it, and you see how I keep all of my strokes sort of like in the same direction so that I can keep the smooth blend following the contouring and shaping of the face. So now I'm just going to go all over that light area with my lightest shade. And this will help me visualize things a little bit better, and I can come back in and add some more depth. So I just want to get that light area all colored now. And now once that's sort of smooth, I can now come back with my main color whilst that's wet and sort of flick into that area, smoothing all the shading. Now to help that nose stand out, I'm going to add just a little bit of shading across the bridge of her nose. And you see how that helps to push her forehead forward as well as push that little button nose forward. I don't want too much detail there, just enough to help push it forward. And then I'm just adding, I've lost a little bit of the depth around her eyes, so I'm just adding a little bit more of my darker shade there, and then I'll blend that out with my main color, just softening it. So you'll see just a little bit of depth in those main areas to make it pop. And here I would have really loved to have turned so that I could flick, but that's all right. So now I'm just going over it so that I can soften it and flicking it into the surrounding skin. Remember, this is such a small area. You're looking at it at quite a zoomed in viewing. So what you're seeing, it's like seeing it with a magnifying glass. And in reality, when someone looks at your images, they're not going to be looking at them with a magnifying glass. You don't have to go overboard with your details. So here, I'm just speeding up. All I'm doing with her chest is just trying to form those sort of round shapes. I'm not doing anything special here. She's a cartoon, so I'm just trying to get a little bit of depth where her breasts would be, and then just where her neck is, make sure it's got some shading, and her shoulders are a little bit round. So, but again, I'm just building it up towards where I think the main highlight is going to be along the top of her chest. And then that's it. So now with her hands, it's such a small area. I've just started straight with the darker shade, and I'm just going to slightly blend it, and then add the lighter shade just for the last little bit. And then the same with the other hand, nothing fancy, just quickly adding a little bit of shading and then a little bit of a highlight at the end. Now I'm going to slow down again when doing these legs, because I have been experimenting and I like to play around with the knee area. So I wanted to show you how I sort of build that up. I try to imagine the knee shape is a little bit squarish, and so I'm building up the shading on the underside of the knee, and then I'm coming now in with the medium, the E11, and I'm just adding a little bit more depth. So I'm still just slowly building up my depth in and around her legs. Now the darkest shade, again, I'm still working on depth, just a little bit up in the corner there, and then just a tiny bit around the knee to start forming the shape. And I do the same on the other side. And now I'm going to use the E11 to sort of build that roundness. So see how I went a little bit over the top? And that sort of makes that round sort of ball of a knee. Now I'm softening all of the lines using the main shade, which is the E01. Starting to form the shape of her legs. Making sure I'll leave a little bit of highlight area. You see how, again, I am trying to keep all of my strokes in the same direction so that when I blend together, they are quite soft, and it's a lot easier to blend it when the strokes are all in the same direction. So now I'm just covering it all with the lighter shade, because then I will come back and add some depth. So now I am adding a little bit of depth. I'm using the E11, not the darkest. Just forming that shape again, just making sure that everything sort of, has that roundness. I was a little bit disappointed with my choice of where I placed the knee on the left of her leg. It looks a little bit lopsided. The dress sort of confused me, I guess, when I first started, and but it's going to look okay at the end. So once I've got all the sparkles and everything, you can't really notice. And some shading that I add a little bit later in the video series. Starting with a medium shade, I am going to start beginning to fill out some of the areas of where it's going to be the darkest. So I've actually, in this particular marker, I've got a lot of ink, and so I'm having to be careful about how much I apply. So you see there, it sort of really starts to, I can see that it's sort of like a lot of ink and it's sort of bleeding a lot. So sometimes you'll find that one of your markers has just got a lot of, it's quite juicy, and so you just need to change the way that you apply it to reduce, the fact that it could sort of, go into other areas. So I don't always know exactly how I want the folds to look until I sort of get closer to the end. So this is why I'm just sort of starting to apply the ink, and then I'll start to figure it out as I build up all of the layers. And creating the folds is definitely about building the layers. You see how even though I've got those legs in the way, I do try to keep all of my strokes in the same direction, because it just helps to keep everything nice and smooth as you build it up. So now I'm coming in with a darker shade, and I'm going to essentially, I think I pretty much go over what I've already just done. So sometimes I go, look, that little area is just not worth it. Straight over the top. Who's going to know except you and me? Okay, so now I'm coming in with an even darker shade. You can see I'm just working with the tip, just enough to get that colour in there. Now let's blend that out. Come in with a medium, just softening those edges. And I really don't like these particular shades. It's just one of those blends that is hard to work, and it really is a case of coming back and forth just to try and build up those shades without sort of getting a blotchy finish. You see how I'm just extending those flicks, trying to keep it in the same direction. And it's the same direction of how I actually think that the folds, or the clothing is actually falling. So rather than colouring from side to side, I'm bringing those flicks down. So each stroke is coming down in the direction that I think that the actual material is falling. Now I'm just adding the lightest shade there just to try and get that pop. And see how it's all sort of gone blotchy. So now I'm going to come back with the dark shade again. Start pushing some of those areas back. I've decided I want to push that back further, so I've come in. And now with the next darker shade, extending that. Smoothing it out, reducing the highlight areas because I wasn't too happy with it. Thought there's too much light in the background there. You can see now how it's just a real sort of slow process to build up the folds. So, and now I've decided not still wrong to have that highlight at the back there, so I'm pushing those back a bit further. And sometimes you just don't know until you try it. So that's why I always do just a little bit at a time, slowly building it up so that I can visually see if that's right, or should I push that back a bit further, or do I need to add a little bit more color there? And if you've gone all the way over it, you limit your possibilities for the future as you build up those folds. So that's why I tend to not color over a whole section first. I tend to like to slowly build it up like I'm doing here. I've added my lighter shade to give me a visual of where I'm going to put my darker shade, and now I'm slowly building it up, and then I can always go over it later. It's harder to take that ink away to try and get the light areas, but of course you can always go over it if you want to make it darker later. here again, so I'm making that darker, softening just that edge there. And just quickly do the sleeves. Now later in the videos, I actually use pencils to make that area even pop more. So sometimes it's nice to have pencils in a similar color so that you can make an area pop once you've put too much ink down. Sometimes it can just be too hard to get more ink down without it beginning to, sit on the surface. So, and also with pencils, you can get it to a really sharp point to really get some of those details in. But so I thought that I would give her the inside of her dress the purple colours, but I'm going to make the outside black. So I'm going to start building up the folds, or how I imagine that the dress is folding. And I'm sort of using the bumps and everything, like the little bumps in the illustrator's drawing, to imagine how she was imagining that the folds would be created. So, and then it's always fun to sort of make up some of your own folds based on how you think that or creases, I guess we would call it, based on how you think the material is falling. So here I'm imagining that there's going to be another little sort of crease with the way that she's holding up that dress there, that part of the dress, and that it falls in and connects to the rest of her dress. So there's the other side of things is that you want to sort of work on forming the shape of things. So think of you've got your cast shadows, which helps to create depth, but you've also got the forming shades. So this is the stage of where we're just forming the shape of the actual, how we imagine that the dress will be folding and creases will be generated. So now I'm coming in with a darker shade. See how I'm still keeping all of my strokes in the direction that I think that the material is falling. This just makes it easier to keep all of your blends nice and smooth once you get to the final stages. So I'm building up that crease, and see how I'm leaving that little bit of a highlight so that I can show that that's going to be a crease, and I'll slowly work towards that highlight. And I've decided that I'm going to have another little crease in there where the that point of that illustration is. Alright, so now coming in with a medium dark shade to start blending out that dark shade, smooth everything out. Being careful to leave a sort of a little area around the edge of the dress there, which is going to help lift it up off the ground. So when we add a lighter colour around the rim of that edge of the dress, it will help lift it from the ground and separate it. You see how I've now joined that there, those two little folds, and then I'm going to take that all the way through. So we've got a little bit of a highlight on the top of the first round bit, and then I've just sneakily joined it together. So we've got a highlight that goes all the way along the next part of the fold. Now here, you want to choose which side you want to build up towards. So here I'm obviously I'm building up to that crease there. And then which side am I going to thicken? So I'm thickening the left-hand side and leaving the dark side on the right. And see how I've just got that tiny little highlight that I left there between that other little crease? And as you see the colour come in, the lighter shade I should say, you'll see that how that gets built up there and turns into, sometimes you can't see it when it's still white. It's not until you actually add the lighter shade that you can go, oh, I can see that fold now. And then you add a little bit extra dark and you start really creating the contrast. And you'll see that as I add some black in there later and everything. So continuing to just, blend everything out, building it up slowly, softening the strokes. Okay, now I'm coming in with a medium grey. Now a lot of people ask me, how do you keep things black? Well, you keep it black by using a lot of the dark shades, and you only have a minimal amount of the lighter shades. And that's what keeps your contrast and makes it look black without going grey. So you just want to limit the amount of the lighter shades, and then and if you find that you've got too much grey, if it's looking too grey, just go back in with another layer, and you'll see that I'm going to do that too. Like I start to push too much of the ink back and I'm like, oh, it's starting to look grey. Okay, I need to come in with a darker shade and start building it up again. And that's a great thing, that if you keep all of your strokes in the same direction, you don't apply too much ink, don't go over and over and over it too much, you can always come back and add more shades and more layers and build that up. And then if you find that you are struggling to be able to do that, grab a pencil, bring in your pencil, add some more depth using your pencil, because that's going to sit on the surface. Okay, so now I'm using the lightest shade here just to get that punch. Filling in those last little areas of the white. See how I'm making sure that I just only go over that little bit of an edge so that it's just enough to soften it, but it doesn't push back that dark areas too much. But you can also use it to make sure that you can push some of those areas back if you wanted to as well. But here we go. Now I'm coming in with a black, and I'm really adding some depth to some of these creases and folds to really make them stand out. You can see how, now that I've sort of got a visualization of those folds, I can go, oh, I really want to accentuate this part of the fold. So I bring in the black there and just really push that section back. And it's also a good way to create some sort of straight lines. So what can happen sometimes is that you'll end up with a wonky line, and with the way that you've been coloring and whatnot. But then if you come back with your darker one, you can sort of like really sort of make that line straight and crisp. That's the word that I'm looking for. Crisp. We want to make it crisp. See where that highlight is? I'm trying to make that nice and crisp. All right. You can see here I'm really, really going dark and making a difference. Okay, now I need to soften out all of those darker areas that I've just created. Now again, just going to soften those edges. So now I'm pushing some of that ink using that lightest shade. So I just wanted that to be a little bit lighter. So just by going over it, it helped push some of that ink back. Essentially, that's sort of the main thing over and over again. So now we're going to do the arm, and I'm going to imagine my own crease here. So I'm imagining that it's connected at her arm, so I'm bringing the point up to the arm, and then it's going to be, obviously the fold is flowing down the sleeve. So, but I'm imagining, the reason I've got the point up at the arm, because that's where the fold is actually sort of the crease begins. So it's not going to be a big round crease at the top. The big round sort of fold is going to be where there's more material. So here I'm sort of creating the underside. So I'm imagining that there's going to be a little bit of a roundness between those two sort of like pockets, a pocket of a fold, I guess. I'll slowly build it up. And this is just my imagination. You can do this however you want. And with practice, you'll start to imagine the way that you want a fold to work as well. So now I'm going all in, and I'm going to add my depth with the darker shade. Slowly building up those areas. Now continuing to soften it as I take it up to the highlight. You notice how I don't have to have the highlight the whole way up. Like I've gone over it a little bit as I start to build it up. Because you're going to have different ways that the light is hitting those folds. They're not going to be perfectly all light or perfectly all dark or medium. That's why you have sort of different levels of shading and building up all these different layers to help create a roundness that it's not all at the same level. I think it's very easy, especially when you're doing hair. It's very easy to keep all of your depth the same. You use the darker shade on all of the dark areas. You use the lighter shade on all of the light areas, and then your hair actually still ends up looking flat. it doesn't look like, you might have all these little elements that are coming and going, but you don't have like the roundness of the head. So that's sort of the same with what's happening with when I build up the folds and creases in clothing. So I try to build different levels of shading within those folds. Now I'm finally filling in the highlights of the lighter shade to sort of see the end result and see what changes I might want to make. As I say, just for me personally, I still have trouble visualizing it whilst there's white there unless I'm purposely leaving white, but I just have trouble until I just fill in that last little bit. And often if I am leaving white, I will use the blender just to get that soft edge to sort of help me visualize it a lot easier. Now see here how I actually just went over that bottom section of the highlight with the medium shade to push that part of the fold back, but I've still got that really nice sharp crease where the highlight is as well. So I'm creating those different levels like what I was telling you about. Now I'm just adding some more depth to that fold, creating the contrast. Now I'm just softening that. So I actually added the black, and now I'm just putting back in, I think I'm using C9 and now C7, which is just going to soften that even more, just making sure that I don't have any major crisp lines that shouldn't be there, like in the areas where it should be nice and soft and smooth. You just want to just try and make sure that you're keeping those lines, those finishes smooth as well. Okay, so this other side, I am doing exactly the same, but I've just sped it up a little bit because otherwise it's going to be a very long process for you to be sitting there. And I don't have much more to actually add. So I've explained the other side, and I'm essentially doing exactly the same on this side. So I'm going to put in just a little bit of music. I'm going to stop talking for the moment. I'm going to put in a little bit of music and until we get to a section that I haven't explained. So, all right, I'll see you on the other side. make a start on the mid area, I tend to try to build up some shading underneath the breast, and then on the sides I like to sort of create, you'll see in a moment, I'm sort of creating that little area of the pelvic area, I guess, and then sort of create sort of like a round oval down sort of like in the middle. So on the underside of the breast, I'm sort of just starting to build up the shape, and I leave a little bit of you see here now I'm creating that like that roundness, so to sort of help accentuate the rib area. So now I'm sort of adding in a darker shade, building up the roundness and forming the shape, and I leave a little bit of a highlight on the underside so that I can help separate that the breast area with like the rib, where the ribs are. Slowly building that up, so I'm just continuing to form the shape by going through the different shades of grey. Now I'm just going over that highlight. As long as I'm going over it with a lighter shade than the darkest shade, you've still got that separation. So it would be no good going over it with my absolute lightest shade, because otherwise it's going to look like there's a highlight under there that is getting hit by the light source, which is not the case. So you don't want to, as I was saying earlier, I want the top of those areas of the actual dress to have the lightest highlight, but underneath I just want something lighter than the darkest shade to help separate those two areas. So here I'm imagining that this dress is really tight, and you can sort of see that there's a little bit of a highlight on her rib cage, and so slowly building that up as though that dress is really tightly sort of connected to her body, starting to build up those shades again. I'm coming in with extra depth, coming in with the black now, making those little areas a little bit darker, still working that shape. Not quite sure exactly how I want it to look, so it's just really a case of going over and over it until I'm happy with it. And I think even at the end I'm still not quite happy with it, and I end up coming back with some pencils later to try and sort of fix it a little bit more. And see, it's the same for me. Like I'm constantly trying to learn new sort of ways to do things, and it's really just a case of practicing and sort of, you know, giving it your best shot. Not many people are going to be sitting there judging your work, so you know, it's all about just having fun and enjoying the process. And you know, I'm sure many of you are sitting there going, my goodness, she just takes forever to colour, but this is what I enjoy doing. It's it makes me relaxed, and I enjoy the process of trying to learn how I want to sort of form the shape of a character, or you know, whatever it is that I'm colouring. So I enjoy that. Like, how can I make this look like my head imagines it? You know what I mean? So yeah. So I mean, that's just me, and you don't have to go to the extent that I'm going here, of course. So, but if you enjoy doing it like I do, then it's a good challenge. So here, see how I'm just applied those few little dots to soften the edge, but I'm not like pushing the ink. I'm not like pulling that, I'm not pulling the marker across the page, just letting the ink do the work. Okay, let's start colouring the hat. Now the first part, I'm just speeding through this as I am just colouring the rim of the hat with the different greys. I've laid down my medium shade, I'm bringing in the darker shade, and I'm keeping all of the strokes in the same direction so that I can keep the blending nice and smooth. And I've started by just, all of my dark colouring is sort of in the centre, and then I'm going to keep that rim around the edge of the actual illustration a little bit lighter, just to help sort of with the transition between the colours in those different areas. And I just like to do that as it just helps to break up all those blocks of segments in the design. Now I've slowed down and I'm going to start building a little crease of where the I think that the material in the hat is folding, and so I've created the underside of the crease there, and all I've done is gone at sort of like at that where the material looks like it is sort of folding over at the bottom there, and then I'm working just, I'm just creating my own little crease there. I'm just filling in this area here whilst it's all wet so it's nice and smooth. Okay, so next I'm going to work out the top side of the crease. So I'm just going to come in there, move that through, and what will happen is that area between those two sections will be the lightest area and will form that roundness as we build up all the shades. So now I am imagining how the material of the hat is just folding around that corner there, just filling in the blocks of colour at the moment, and I will build that up with darker colours. You see how I still try and keep my strokes in the same direction as the illustration, or how I imagine the design is, or the material is positioned, so that I can try and keep my colouring as smooth as possible. So now I'm coming in with the darkest shade and I am putting it around these creases. I'm starting to build up my shading there. Now I'm just working that. And you see how just keeping that tiny little white area between those two segments there helps to give you the impression that the material in the hat is bent there. So now coming back in with the medium shade, continuing to soften the edge as I extend the colouring towards the highlight. Now I'm not too worried about going out of the line like I did there, because I plan to cut this hat out and put it onto my wizard. So now what I did just there is I have a shadow on, I'm imagining that on that side of the actual crease is a bit of a shadow. I still want it to be lighter than the darker side, but I want to give it a little bit of a roundness. I don't want it to be a set highlight, just that whole thick bit. And then when I bring in the lightest shade, you'll see how that helps to form the roundness appearance of that crease. So now we're going all over the highlight with the lightest shade, and you see how just by having that shadow there on the one side of the crease, it really gives it sort of more of a roundness appearance. And of course I will likely come back and add some more depth after doing this. Yep, so I've decided that I want that shadow to be a little bit more pronounced. Just filling that in. Trying to keep it nice and smooth. And now I'm softening that edge just a little bit more. Now I've decided that I want to just tidy up that edge there and make it a little bit more crisp. So I've come in with a darker shade and I'm just making some of the areas stand out just that little bit more. I was getting annoyed by that tiny little thing there, but I probably made it worse. Oh well. That's where a pencil actually comes in handy, because you can get into those really tight spots. As you can see, I am a fussy colorer. I definitely like it having the nice boldness of and the huge contrast that you can achieve by going just that little bit darker. It's amazing how if you just add that one little extra layer of colour, how it can really help make your image pop. Sometimes if you think you've done enough, I'm going to say go in once more and just see what happens. As long as your paper can accept it, of course. There it does come a point where the paper can no longer accept any more ink and it starts to sit on the surface. That's the time we definitely don't want to put another layer in. All right. So see just there how I went over it a little bit. That was to try and help push part of that back, but while still having the crease there, because it's still lighter than the surrounding elements, the surrounding colours. And it still helps, I don't know, it just helps to give it that little bit extra depth of where you've got the top part with the highlight, you've got the bottom part that is slightly darker or in shadow. And yeah, it's just something that you can practice with. So here I'm just colouring in the purple area. It's a little bit of a quirky area because you've got that bat decoration in the way. So you just try your best. Don't have to do anything too fancy. I've just done a really basic blend using the different purples. And then there, I was just using the ink just to soften that edge and push that back. My markers, my purple markers are very full, and so they are really pushing the ink around on this paper at the moment, which is a little bit annoying. You can see it just going everywhere. But I wasn't too worried because I was planning on colouring the bat black. Now here I want to show you how difficult it is to colour these particular blends of purple together, and how I tried to do a good job, but those particular colours are just hard to do. See how you get that edge there? You can still see those streaks, but I've tried to soften it out as best as I can. But through softening it, the ink starts to blend and bleed into the surrounding paper, and so it can make it quite difficult if you are planning on working on an image that you don't in the future plan to cut out. Fortunately I am planning to cut this image out, so I wasn't too worried about going over the lines. And had I have not been planning on colouring it out, I may have decided to be a little bit more careful in the way that I coloured that image. So I must apologise because I had thought that I'd pressed the record button and I hadn't. And when I realised I'd already done her eyes and begun on the hair, so I'm actually going darker than I had originally intended so that I can start going over and showing you what I was doing as I was building up the shades. So here we go. I'm actually just keeping it very loose because I'm going with a fun colour of green. I'm just sort of keeping my flicks loose, keeping the highlights loose. I'm not doing anything drastic. It is a small area. If I wanted to concentrate on doing gorgeous hair, I typically will print an image a little bit larger so that I have more area to work in. So here I'm just slowly just sort of building up, and it's really about just sort of giving the impression that, you know, that she's got some, you know, different sort of levels and flicks in their hair, and rather than, you know, just trying to really get all that detail in, it's just not necessary all the time. So now I'm just softening those flicks that I applied. At this stage, I'm just sort of like starting to build those layers and trying those tufts of hair that are, you know, that have come forward. I'm trying to make sure that I don't go too dark with those areas. I want to keep some of the highlight. I want to keep the highlight of the roundness of her head. See, around the top of her head, I'm making sure that I've got like a band that's going to be like a smiley face, or just trying to create that roundness to make sure that I've still got the formation of the shape of her head. So now I'm just adding some extra depth, coming in, and I'm pushing certain areas back, see here, and I'm still making sure that I leave other areas forward. So I'm not going to put this dark green everywhere. Choosing just to put it in the areas that I want to push back. So here I'm trying to make sure that I get that like curl look underneath there. Push these little areas at the back. And then under here I want to try and add some depth, trying to push that one back, which helps to bring the other ones forward. And remember, this image is quite small. Like this, her head is like the size of my, you know, fingernail, and so it's a just a little area. And because you're seeing a zoomed up version of it, it just sort of, you know, obviously those little areas where I'm going out of the lines and things can look more dramatic than they do to the real eyes. So, but if I don't zoom in, you don't get to see all those tiny little details. So. Now I am zooming. Now I'm coming in with a lighter colour, just softening those flicks. And you don't have to soften your flicks. That's just my style. Still want to see some of the texture there, but now I'm just coming over the lightest shade, filling in those highlights. Sort of trying to make her hair look like it's glowing, do you know what I mean? So, I do come in with pencil later and add some more depth as well. So now I'm just adding some shading to her eyes and her skin, and I'm using a purple just to help make it stand out. And the idea here is I don't want to blend it. So I'm leaving it as the purple shadow. And this is the cast shadows. So see here, I'm now adding the cast shadow onto her legs from her dress. And I did fail to move the image up. So you'll see that as I've come down, I've gone over it. I'm now going over it again just to show you what I had done. And see how I sort of pull away from the corner and then do the cast shadow. I'm not doing it exactly. I'm sort of like trying to imagine how that material is casting a shadow across her actual her skin. Okay, so now I'm just adding some colour to her lips, and I didn't like how purple it was. So what I can do is I can change the tone by adding her skin colour over the top, and then that helps to actually tone down that colour, but I've still got a different colour to the actual skin. Okay, so in this one, I wanted to share with you how I choose my pencil to match the color of the Copics, or it won't necessarily match it, but it'll be close enough. So here what I've done is I've added a little bit of a scratch of Copic on my page, and I'm going through all of my pencils that look like they're close enough to the actual color. And I've chosen a couple of colors, and so here you can see now I can come back in over my image and darken up some of the areas and help to make some of them pop. But I'm keeping all of my strokes in a similar direction so that I don't have to worry about blending and trying to make everything look like it's going to match. But by doing this, and especially had I have sharpened my pencils, it would have been so much easier, I can really get that extra level of pop and contrast using pencils. So here you can see I'm essentially this whole area, I just simply went right over the top of it basically. And now I wanted a lighter color, but I wasn't sure which one I wanted, so I went and tried a few different ones, and that light pink seemed like it was going to be perfect. It just helps to bring out those colors that little bit more. So now I want to add some extra contrast and depth to her dress. So I'm just going to be working with black, and my black pencil is so short that I can barely sharpen it these days. So what I essentially try to do with a pencil is, I guess in a way, I'm adding contrast by deepening the shadows and deepening the color, but I'm also trying to sharpen areas of the image that are difficult to sharpen when you are using a Copic marker or any type of alcohol marker, where it's always going to have that element of bleeding because of the way that paper fibers are. The ink is going to bleed and soften and blend, but here you can start to build up some of those nice sharp lines that you can get with your folds and your shadows, especially if you have a longer pencil. So now I'm just slowly going through all the little areas that catch my eye, and I go, yep. And I'm not doing any type of blending with that black. I'm just putting that black, as long as I color in the same direction as the material and the same direction, all of my strokes in the same direction, you don't need to do any further blending. Just let the pencil blend itself. See how I'm just following the shape of that curve. I'm not trying to color it in any other direction other than following the shape of that curve or that fold that I've created. So now I'm going to add the white pencil over some of those highlights, just to really help to emphasize them. Now, the one thing you need to be careful with a white pencil is putting it over a dark shade will make it look chalky. So you want to try and avoid doing it over your dark ones and put it over just to help give your highlights a little bit more of a pop. You can add a little bit of white pencil and it won't look as chalky as it would if you put it over a dark area. Sometimes you'll want that chalky effect, so don't be afraid to try and experiment things, but that is what can happen if you try to make something lighter in a darker area. But again, as you can see, I use my white and my black a lot. It's a tiny little pencil. So there, I was still not happy with that midsection. I'm trying to just lighten it a little bit, and then I'll come in with my finger and do a little bit of softening, using my finger as a blender rather than trying to use anything else. So now I'm going to do the same with her hair. So I've brought in my main green shade of the hair, and I'm going to come in with some different colored greens to see what will work, and I'm happy with those. So again, I wish I had have sharpened my pencil, but that's just the way things are. But this will now give me a little bit extra depth that I was struggling to achieve. And had I have sharpened my pencil, you can get those really nice detailed flicks, but I'm not attempting to get that style of hair with this particular image. So I was happy enough with the detail that I was getting. I was just trying to add a little bit extra depth without, and you can see right here, I am doing exactly the same as I would had I been using Copics. I've added a little bit of that darker shade, and then I'm using a lighter shade to help soften it and blend it out. Just going over those areas, building that up, and then extending it and softening the edges with my lighter shade. Whoops, my thumb really got in the way there. One thing that I like about with pencils is that you can come in, and this particular color green really made her hair glow. And I really loved how I was able to do that and just really push it to that next level. Now just adding a little bit of the darker shades so that I can get a little bit more of a pop. After I added that lighter shade, it was needed that little bit extra depth, and again I'm just softening it. Okay, I thought that it would be fun to do some magic swirls or something going around the witch, and I had an idea, and I'm showing you the idea because I'm not happy with the idea that I had. I ended up changing what I was doing and I didn't have a plan before I started. I can be a little bit like that, where I don't fully think it through, and then I have to do lots of fixer-uppers. And so this is a bit of a, although it looks cool at the end, there was a bit of a fixer-upper process to try and make it look all right. But I learned some stuff, and so you're going to learn some stuff too. So what I'm trying to do was create my swirl around her with the pencil going over where I wanted it to go over the top of her, the sparkles to go over. And then I was using a light yellow to sort of help me visualize how I would follow that through. And then I was planning on, as you can see here, I'm using a darker yellow just around the edges to try and work out, try and leave the areas that I wanted to be as a highlight as I built up the background. So here I'm sort of starting to fill it in again. I'm sort of trying to build the outside of the little swirls, the flourishes and stuff that I'm working on. But I think what would have probably been best is to simply color the background and then use the white pencil at the very end to build up my, my swirls. So lesson learned, but this is all right too. It still worked out, and I like the result, the end result, and I was able to have a bit of fun and slowly build up the colors, build up my swirls, and make her look like she was doing some magic. So here, as you can see, I'm just being really rough. I love doing these types of backgrounds. You just scribble it on. And then if you are like me and you love your distress inks, I will often cut out my image and then add the edges. I'll smooth out all the edges with distress inks, which is pretty cool. All right, so there we go. I had just added a little bit of a shadow at the bottom. And now I am working on the white, using a white pencil. I'm trying to build up these swirls, making some new ones. See there, I've just started adding some new ones there. Trying to imagine how these flourishes are going to swirl around. And the white isn't as white as that. Sorry, my lighting, obviously the contrast there was a bit bright. It looks more like it does on the right hand side. Definitely is not that white on the left. So I wish it was. How cool would that be? But the great thing that I found was when I went over that white pencil with the distress inks, it really stood out. It like brought that white pencil, because the wax in the pencil resisted the distress ink, it really made it pop. So I've done another image since then where I've just done the white pencil and then put the distress ink over the top, and it really helped to stand it out. So that's probably what I would do in the future. So now I am using my glaze pen, the little white one, and I am just doing lots and lots and lots of little dots. I wish that I had waited a little bit longer for the dots to dry before putting so many close together, because I may have changed the way that I did the dots. And yeah, it's just practice. It's just experimenting and practice, but the effect is pretty awesome. So the only thing with this particular glaze pen is that when you put it on, it goes on sort of clear. You can't see exactly what happens until it fully dries, and then the opacity sort of increases and you can see just how white those dots are. It is one of my favorite sort of gel pens for that purpose, but just difficult to see when you first put your dots on. So what I found was that in the white areas, the dots didn't really stand out when you're looking at them. So by adding this dark gold, I was able to help really accentuate the sparkles and make them look more like sparkles and magic dust. So adding something with a similar color to your background, and that it's darker than obviously the white, you can help to accentuate those sparkles that you're creating.